Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special event hosted by the Institute for Electronic Arts. My name is Miranda Metcalf, and I'm the director of the IEA. Before we begin, I would like to consciously and intentionally recognize, acknowledge, and honor that Alfred University sits on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Onondaga, or Great Hill people. With a proud and rich history of the Seneca Nation of Indians, also known as the Keepers of the Western Door, they are the largest and westernmost of 6 nations that constitute the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of Nations, a democratic government that predates the United States Constitution. It is my absolute delight this afternoon to introduce to you Dennis McNett, also known as the Wolfbat. Dennis is an interdisciplinary artist whose work conjures a synergistic storm of printmaking, sculpture, storytelling, and community. A multifaceted maker of large-scale wood carvings, printed editions, skateboard graphics, and beyond, Dennis is known for his iconic, larger-than-life, woodcut, print-covered puppets and masks that are used to lead narrative ceremonies and public processions. His unique happenings and workshops have been hosted by diverse art institutions, universities, music festivals, and special events across the United States and abroad, including over 30 visiting artist and lecturer appointments. Dennis has a BFA from Old Dominion University and an MFA from Pratt Institute, where he taught from 2004 to 2013. Dennis studied under Bob Blanton of Brand X Editions, where he later was employed, and between 2021 and 2024, he printed works by artists such as Chuck Close, Helen Frankenthaler, Alex Katz, and many others. He founded Wolfbat Studios in 2007 as a nomadic DIY workspace encompassing fully functional printmaking studio, workshop, and a puppet sculpture shop that's been held in spaces in New York City, Houston, Philadelphia, Richmond, Austin, and now he's in Luray, Virginia. His work has been displayed internationally in museums and galleries, including the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Me Collection Museum in Berlin, the MOHS exhibit in Copenhagen, and the Galleria Patricia Armocida in Milano, the Museum of Print History in Houston, Texas, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, Florida, and many more. We are so lucky to have Dennis with us for 2 weeks, during which time he'll be hosting a mask-making workshop and building a Viking ship in the wood shop. The mask-making workshop is on the 4th floor of this building. I know many of you have already been participating. If you haven't got a chance, please check it out. It's going to be open tomorrow and the next day from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at least. Dennis's visit is supported by the National Endowments for the Arts, the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, the New York State Council for the Arts, the Shine Joseph Endowment, the School of Art and Design, and the Department of Expanded Media at the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dennis McNett.
Thanks, Miranda. Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me here. What a killer school. It's like walking around, you have all these amazing facilities, and I'm already having fun in the mask-making workshop. You guys are really talented, and it's been fun so far, and I hope it continues to be so. And Miranda, thanks for bringing me out. I appreciate you having me here. I'm just going to dive into this because I always get nervous doing these things. I always start with this story. My grandfather, or this is my great-grandfather, and he was still around when I was a kid, and we'd go over there, and they'd give me crayons and stuff because I was always getting into stuff, and they'd say, "Here, draw something," you know. And I loved making stuff as far back as I can remember, and I would draw, and I show my great-grandfather the image, and he'd go, "Oh my gosh, that's so good, draw some more." And he was blind, so I thought that the drawings were magic somehow, and that he could see them. So from a very little age, I always believed in magic. And I remember this was a thunder kind of creature I made. But I remember as a kid thinking I could talk to the thunder, and whenever a thunderstorm would come through, I remember having full conversations, and even then I remember I had to kind of keep it a secret from my parents because, I knew they thought that, I was loopy. So I was going to drop in a couple influences, and then I'll just jump right into what I'm doing now. Big influence was Star Wars. Saw that with my dad when it first came out in theaters. I was very little, but at the time now it's on everything, but at the time there was nothing like it. And as a kid, they were talking about this very spiritual thing called the Force that was in and around everything, and they were talking about light and dark. And from an early age, I could really connect with that as well. Later on, I got into skateboarding, and for me, what really dragged me into it was the graphics, because I was so into making stuff, and especially the early 80s graphics. They were all, hand-drawn, and these Powell Peralta graphics, they had these skulls and snakes and dragons, and as a 13-year-old, I was like, yes, I love this stuff, So I would draw this stuff on my notebooks, and I found out later all these were lino cuts by Cortland Johnson. These were Zorlak boards on the left here. These were some of the very first ones I saw when I was a kid. And these were the images. I was like, man, I want to draw this stuff. And I used to draw it on everything. And I think I had a physical reaction to that John Gibson graphic there when I was a kid. I was just like, ah! Like when I saw it. Another thing I was looking at is these high contrast graphic images of show flyers and punk rock album covers. And this was all stuff that I was, looking at when I was a kid. And then later, I went to a community college, and I figured, I'm done with high school, I'll go to this community college. And I tried drawing with charcoal, and I kept snapping the charcoal because I was pressing too hard, and I'd make a muddy mess with the paint because I was impatient. And the instructor was, he was hunched over this big hunk of metal, and he's sitting there and he's carving this block, and I didn't know what he was doing. And then he takes out this ink and he rolls up the block that he had been carving on. And he cranks it through the big metal thing that turned out to be an etching press. And when he lifted it up, it looked like all the stuff that I was into. It had that same graphic quality as like the punk rock album covers and the skateboard graphics. It was high contrast, and it was raw. And so I was hooked immediately, and I started doing relief prints then, and never stopped really. And that was a long time ago. But these were some of the very first ones I did when I moved to New York City, and I was trying to develop characters, and I was really had an affection for wolves because I had a wolf when I was younger, and she was very expressive. Like when she was angry, she would throw her front feet down and she'd bristle up all the hair on her back, and she'd roll her lips up real slow, but she would be dead silent. You'd be like, ooh, she's pissed. Very expressive. So I started to use wolves as characters, and these were some bigger woodcuts, big 4 foot by 8 foot woodcuts. And again, I was just kind of working off of doing unsavory characters, making up stories about, all these, like the snow leopard with the goat, and then, I did a snow leopard with the tail turned into a snake. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to get a little bit vulnerable, and I had gotten addicted to drugs when I was very, pretty young, like straight out of high school, and then I ended up getting clean. Once I got clean, I went to New York City, and I was like, man, I want to do something with myself. I want to be an artist. And I thought I had to teach, so I went to grad school, and I finished up the mess I had made of my undergrad, and I went to grad school. And I went after all of the things, especially printmaking for me, like I did the drugs. Like I went at it hardcore. So I got an internship with Kathy Carrasio that had this space in New York City. She ran a press for 30 years, and I worked at Brand X Editions and, started doing Chuck Close prints and being responsible for doing all these things. And I was just like a sponge. I couldn't get enough. This was Kathy Carrasio, and Kathy kind of taught me to hustle. Like she was like, look, you need to, you're living in New York now, you need to stretch your dollars because things are expensive, and the profession the path that you're going down, you're going to need to know how to stretch your money, right? So Kathy had a studio in Manhattan for over 30 years, and that's no small accomplishment to keep a fine art printing press going by yourself. And then I met Bill Fick. This is one of Bill Fick's images, and I just really loved his stuff. And I remember when I was having a hard time, he introduced me to all kinds of people. And one of the big things that he told me when I was having a hard time in grad school, he'd say, stop putting up one thing and put up 100, and then they have to talk about what you're actually putting up. So he introduced me to this guy, Richard Mock, and Richard Mock did politically charged linoleum cuts for the New York Times for about 18 years. And Richard was the first real deal artist I'd ever met, because I grew up in Virginia Beach, which is like a small beach town. It's not a lot of culture. My dad was a police officer. My mother was a bank teller. So there wasn't a lot of like, hey, let's go to the museum or check out these books. It was, go cut the grass and keep it moving, kid, So when I met like a real deal artist, I was like, wow. Like this guy, he was in an old brick building in Brooklyn, and his bed was here, and his printing press was over there, and he had a hot plate, like a makeshift kitchen set up, and knee deep everywhere were these lino blocks he had carved his entire life. And I was like, wow, and it hit me, and he kind of took me under his wing a bit. So later, something that happened that was really cool for me was I got an email from Anti-Hero Skateboards in San Francisco, and they said, hey, we saw one of your prints, and we were wondering if you do a series of skateboards. Now, I just told you I grew up skateboarding, loved the graphics. I thought it was a joke. I thought my friends were playing a joke on me. And I was like, no way is this real. And so I was like, get out of here, and they wrote back, no, seriously, do you want to do a series of boards? So this was the very first series of boards I had done. I'm trying to go through this quick because this stuff was great and I loved doing it. But later I came to some realizations of what I really love to do and how I want to spend my time and how I don't want to spend my time. And I'll talk more about that. These were more skateboard graphics. Something that happened because of the skateboard graphics, I got an email from Vans Shoes, and they were like, because they watch that industry because they're marketing their product, right? So they said, hey, would you want to do some limited edition artist shoes? And I had this big thing, like I was weighing, like I never set out to do shoes, and I was like, should I do this? Is this selling out somehow? And, I bounced it off a bunch of friends, and the last friend said, look, do you like hanging drywall? And I said, no, I really don't like hanging drywall. And they said, well, are they asking you to do anything that you wouldn't normally do? Like they didn't say, hey, can you do two flowers kissing on the side of a shoe? They said, can you do your artwork and put it on this thing? And I said, yeah, they're just asking me to use some of my work. He said, well, are they going to pay you? And I was like, yeah, it's like they're paying like pretty good. And so I did it. And what I did with that money is I got my very first studio in New York, because otherwise I couldn't afford it. So I took all that money and just put it right into rent in this little tiny 8 by 10 studio. But then I started to do a lot of like skateboard graphics and stuff for Thrasher magazine and stuff for Anti-Hero and Nitro snowboards. And these were a lot of the graphics that I had done. But something else I did with the check and it from the shoes was they had this big art parade in New York City, and it was Jeffrey Deitch had put it on, and it went down West Broadway, And I'm really dumb with money. Like, I want materials and space. That's what I want. Like, I don't want a Cadillac Escalade, and I don't want anything fancy, right? So I was like, I'm going to resurrect this this Nordic wolf, because I had this obsession with wolves, and I was reading this Nordic mythology, and there was this giant wolf named Fenris that was killed by Odin on the battlefield during Ragnarok. And I love stories, and I love, ever since Star Wars, and I love that good and bad and that tension. And to me, the giants were always the good guys, and the gods were the bad guys. So the god had killed this wolf. The wolf's just hanging out, trying to be a wolf, so I changed the ending. Because Fenris had this sister named Hel, and Hel was the only character in Nordic mythology that had the power of resurrection. So I rewrote it that she waited till the flames died down from Ragnarok. She found her brother's carcass on the battlefield, crossed him with a bat, and resurrected him so he could fly the earth and destroy the gods. So a wolf bat was born. So this was the very first performative project that I had ever done. And so we built a wolf bat, and I made all these costumes and sprayed everybody with fake blood and fur boots, and we walked in this parade in, down West Broadway in Manhattan. And it was called The Resurrection of Fenris. And then this actually got into the New York Times, so that for me that was like a huge deal. Or they made a small mention. They talked about the parade, and they made a small mention of this project. So, but something that happened during the procession is, after it, my friends took the mask off, and they looked like 5 years younger in the face, and they looked lighter. And I was like, ooh, what is that? And it was that they had dropped all their ego, and they had dropped all this stuff, and they could hide behind this mask and be whoever they wanted. And we were all part of something bigger than ourselves. And at the end of it, I was like, man, I got to get some more of that. I told you I'm very into printmaking, very into woodcuts, love the mark. After doing hundreds of images, I was like, well, what else can I do with this stuff? Because I know how to build. And I was like, man, what it would look like if I started skinning things with the woodcut prints. So I started to do sculptures and installations, and then use my woodcut print patterns to cover these things. This was one of the very first installations I did. This was in New York City on the Lower East Side, small gallery. But I made all these sculptures, and the panels on the wall, I printed a bunch of, because you're able to make multiples of your work with printmaking. So I made all these different things, like I made a sky pattern and a bunch of wheat and grass and all these different patterns, and I printed them up, and then I used that stuff as drawing material to create the mural. And then I would use like acrylic tints to color them. This is another sculpture. I did this show in New York City, and it was a really weird time. Within 2 years, I lost 4 of my very close friends. People that I was the closest to, all of them had passed away within 2 years of just freak things. One was stung by a wasp. One went in for a simple procedure and never came out of the hospital. And so it made me start thinking about, how our time and how we spend it and who we spend it with, and like that's your actual currency. Like that's what's of value is, who you spend your time with and how you spend it, and it's borrowed. Like it's we're only here temporarily. So anyway, I kind of got obsessed with like a saint of death type of character. This was an installation. The wave represented death, and each one of the ships represented my friend, each friend that had passed, and death was taking them, and the ship was their vessel. Their portraits are on the sails, and then I used print to add symbols that represented each of them were printed on the wood of the ships. And then I built these 2 big Viking ships, and these were outside, so this was a celebration of their life. So we took these ships out into the street in Chelsea, and there was a drummer inside, and they were playing some metal tunes, and there was the second ship had a metal band set up inside of it, and we essed our way all through Chelsea in New York, and we went the wrong way down the street sometimes, and cabs were swerving out of the way, and I handed out 150 battle axes, and people were just losing their mind. It was, it was a celebration of their life, and it was like, wow, like we did it, like we're doing it, fuck yes. And so we pulled down the main street where the gallery was, where the other ship was, and the metal band was set up, and they saw us, and they did a call and response, and then they broke into their set, and it was amazing, and it was really fun, and it felt right, like it felt like a celebration, and I wanted more of that, because this is a weird path to go down, right? So like you can go down the path where you're trying to make work that's talked about as an investment or caters to a certain type of person, or you can go down this whole other path where it engages a lot of people and you give people memories, and it's like you almost serve as like a lighthouse, right? This was one of the fireworks actually exploded in the ship, and these were some of the people in it. I ended up making several ships afterwards, again because each one had meant something. This one was in Corpus Christi, Texas, and we built this big ship. We filled it with these palm fronds because they burn hot and fast, and we wheeled it down to the beach there in the bay. The bay was called Oso Bay, so there was a bear effigy in the ship. And we made all of these masks, and the whole idea was that, I made up this story that the Woodcut tribe had migrated to Corpus Christi to ask this bear spirit to clean their heart of hate, apathy, fear, and anger so they could go forth with a clean heart, right? So the sculpture kids actually made these effigies of hate, apathy, fear, and anger, and were casting them in iron on the beach, like casting them out. And this woman, Maria, she did this beautiful opera song to start it, and then as soon as she was done, then the metal band started to play, and we cracked open the last iron cast, and it was the bear's heart, and it was glowing red. And so we picked it up and we put it in the bear's heart, and it ignited the whole ship, and it was like another celebration. So that was the ship burning. And then there was stuff like this that happened. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth on a timeline here. So this is Barney's in New York, and Barney's had asked me to. I had no idea what this store was. It was a friend of mine called, and she said, "Look, they want to put your stuff in the windows of Barney's." And I was like, and at the time I told you I had this little tiny studio. I was like, "Get it out of here." Great. So they sent a team down, and they were going to do this one window, and they started looking around. They said, "Actually, we're going to do all of the windows," and they took everything out. And I was like, great. The one thing that was interesting for me was just to see the stuff in front of a different audience, but this didn't have the same internal feeling as like the processions or these happenings that I had done. Something that I started doing several years back is this event called Hollow Wolf Bat. So I like metal music, and I like theatrics, and I like all this kind of stuff. So I started curating these shows, and we have these big puppet battles while the bands are playing, and these were some of the giant puppets. But I started getting more into these interactive things, and this was also another kind of funny thing. With the skateboarding, they used to kick us out of everywhere we went. Like if they saw a skateboard in your hand, you'd get called everything under the sun, any kind of bad word and everything else, and they'd shoo you off. And then, fast forward 30 some odd years later, the museum calls and says, "Hey, we want to put a skate park in the museum, and we want you to help us put some artwork to show the history of the skateboard as this cultural thing, right? So it was just kind of a cool thing that happened. This is the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. So all of these sculptures are covered with prints, and all of the bigger images were they started as prints, but they were blown up to just kind of fill the space in there. This was one of my favorite projects, and I put this one in here. It was at the University of Tennessee, and I usually will call, like I'll talk to whoever is asking me to come out, and I'll say, well, is there anything specific to that area that, you know, any kind of folklore or something that I could tie into? And the guy I was talking to, well, not really. He said, well, there's this one thing that happened here, and it was really bad. And I was like, well, what is it? You know, and so he starts to tell me this horrible story of this circus that had come through their town, like at the late 1800s or early 1900s. And the big attraction was this big African elephant named Big Mary. And they had hired some people from the town to help with the circus because they were shorthanded. And one of the people that they were hired, their responsibility was to herd the elephants. And Big Mary had this abscessed tooth. And the guy was herding the elephants, and he poked Big Mary in the wrong spot, so she threw him with her trunk, and he hit his head on this thing, and it killed him. And then the town demanded justice. They wanted the elephant put down for killing this man, right? And then the circus, you know, they're like, well, that's our moneymaker. And I'm just listening to the story and thinking of all these metaphors of the way the society is now. And how can we make money off this horrible thing? And so they sold tickets to a hanging of this elephant from this rail car. It was just like horrible, right? And it's like, yeah, and they brought the other elephants out to watch, and they're these highly intelligent creatures. And, you know, I was getting all choked up while he was telling me. And I was like, okay, well, that's what we're doing. Like, we're gonna resurrect Big Mary and give her the proper respect that she deserves, right? So it was a room like this, maybe a few more people, and I was giving a talk, and I was like, yeah, and we're going to build this African elephant to scale, and we have 5 days to do it. And people were like, you're not going to build an elephant that big in 5 days. And I was like, no, we're going to build it. We're going to honor Big Mary by the end of the week, right? So this was first day. We got like a lima bean on 2x4s kind of looking thing going, and a couple of students got interested, and they're like, oh, wow, I think they're actually going to build that thing, right? So, you know, by the next day, we really started fleshing this thing out. And before I knew it, there was like 50 or 60 people that wanted to help resurrect Big Mary and give her this respect, because they had heard the story too. So we started fleshing her out, and got her all covered with prints, and got her looking all pretty, and people around the town were starting to talk about it, because they're like, it was something they would leave and they didn't want anyone talking about, you know. But they were talking about it and kind of hashing it out, and like, yeah, let's do this thing. We'll honor Big Mary. So this was the crew that I ended up with, and that's Big Mary. So we paraded her through the town, and she stayed in a permanent location for, semi-permanent location for about 4 or 5 years, and then started to deteriorate because it is paper mache. But that was one of my favorite projects. This is the Serpent of Sheboygan. Again, went to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and with the color arts center there, and made up a whole story about the Serpent of Sheboygan and why the Whippat tribe had migrated there to conjure up this beast. So again, a lot of times I'll make up the story, and then I'll be like, oh no, now I got to build this giant thing. You know, so I made up the story, and here's the giant thing, and it's all covered with prints. Like I said before, it's all skinned with woodcut prints. This was an installation at the Fort Wayne Museum. So I'm trying to talk to you about this, like dancing in between all these different worlds. Like there's the graphic stuff with the skateboards, and then there's like the dealing with museums and trying to sell work, and then get funding for doing community projects are the ones that I really enjoy. Like it hits me in a different way. This was a mural I did in San Francisco recently, and I wanted to show a couple of these because I know there's some printmaking people here. This is all done with screen prints. So it's all, I just took a couple suitcases of screen prints and gel medium and used it as drawing material on the walls to create these murals. This is one that was done in Philadelphia. This is a kind of smaller, like 8 by 12 foot. But this is all, they're all prints, and they're all just hand tinted with acrylic washes. This was a really big one. So this one's done differently. They printed out like a ghost image on this canvasy cloth, and then you actually paint it on and then adhere it to the wall. This was an interesting project. Again, I was asked to go down to South Carolina in Conway, and the college there was like, I asked them the same question: is there any kind of folklore I can tie into? And they said no, but there's people called the Gullah people here. Have you guys ever heard of the Gullah community? Gullah Geechee? Well, I had to, I looked it up, and basically it's people that were stolen from the west coast of Africa, brought to the east coast of America, and forced to do labor and build these rice plantations all up the east coast from Florida to Virginia. So it's an intermingling of West African tribes. So there's that intermingling kind of created a dialect and a cuisine with the sources that were there. And so they said, well, maybe you could do something with this community. And I said, well, you need to put me in touch with that community, because you and I can't have that conversation, right? So it turned into this thing, and I was introduced to this woman named Zenobia, who's Gullah, and we became very close. Like, we talked a lot during COVID, and I was like, well, how do I do this? And she was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, how do I do this as a white guy, an older white guy from Virginia, coming down to South Carolina to participate in a black cultural event? And she said, well, you're doing it. We're talking, right? So we started to talk, and we started to talk about the right way to do it, and what's cultural appropriation and what is not. And like I said, we became very close, and we started talking about ideas of how we want to, how we could collaborate. And she said, well, we do Gullah Day in downtown Conway, and maybe you could do one of your parades, but we have a Gullah character that leads it. And so Zenobia is kind of, her and I can get kind of dark. So she said, oh, we got these hags and haints. Maybe we could do some hags and haints, and we'll have those in the procession. And I was like, yeah, and there's this other character that carries a mirror and shows people themselves, and maybe people can take a look at themselves. And we're talking all this stuff. It was all like, it started getting kind of heavy, and it's like, because haints are supposed to sit on your chest and restrict your breath like COVID does, right? So we're talking about all this stuff. And do you ever watch Nickelodeon? There's this show called Gullah Island. You ever see that? Anyway, there was a show called Gullah Island. The couple that ran it, or that hosted the show, was Natalie and Ron Days. They're both Gullah, and they're both near Conway, and I got to meet them. And Natalie, me and Zenobia are talking to her about these ideas, and Natalie says, well, the haints are kind of heavy. Let's go with something a little more neutral. Let's go with Mame Wata, right? It's like a mother water, or like a loving, caring mother water, right? and she said that there's a lot of things tied to that, like when people were stolen and brought over, rather than live in slavery, they would jump ship. And the idea that it was that Mame Wata would take them to a better place. And she was also talking about how the water had touched everything on earth, and there was a lot of different meanings connected to Mame Wata. So this was what I created. So this is Mame Wata, and I don't care how crazy this sounds. When I started to work on making her, I would ask. I'd say, "Hey, how do you want this done?" Right, to her, and she'd say, "Well, it's like this," and I'd start making it, and I'd say, "Well, what about this?" And she'd say, "No, it's not like that. It's like this," and until I had her face correct, and then she was like, "Okay, that's it." And traditionally, she's known to be in white and red robes, and I said, "Okay, I'm gonna make her robes now. It's the white and red," and she's like, "No, they're blue," and I was like, "No, well, nope, they're blue." Very, very clear, and I don't care how crazy that sounds, that's the way that happened. And so at the end of it, I ended up donating this Mame Wata to the Gullah community, and I did something right because they invited me back to some more events. This was another community event in Birmingham, UK, for a music festival called Supersonic. So this was a different thing, but similar in nature, that I got to work with a whole community that I hadn't worked with before. And the same as here, like even like the people that were making masks today, it's like you start knowing, you have small conversations. Where are you from? What do you do? What, that kind of stuff. And it's just cool, and it feels good and safe to be in a room full of people making stuff, to me anyways. And there's like a connection there's a connection because of that. So to me, these types of things are more meaningful than trying to make pieces that I can sell for $10,000 or $20,000. But I saw this funny quote the other day, and I think it was Rick Rubin said, "You're born an artist, and society does its best to beat it out of you." So, it's like, how do you keep doing stuff like this? And it's like, well, you get, there's grants, and there's, like Miranda brought me out here, and you figure out different ways to do these things and make a living. This was this is not Stonehenge. This is a Stonehenge replica in Odessa, Texas. And I put this one in there because I think that's funny. But this was a whole crew, and we did this. We did a whole happening ceremony at this Stonehenge, and I had done one there 10 years earlier that was really funny too. This is another recent one. This was in Asbury Park. I'm actually going back there this year, and it's like I said, it's. I've done these things, and then later, 20 years later, I'm still friends and connected to some of the people that I've done these projects with. And I don't know that a blue chip artist can say that. This is also a recent one. This guy I brought with me, so he'll be in the hot dog parade, along with the Viking ship that we're building. And this is a mask I made in 3rd grade, so not much has changed. Right? So, but that's all I got. So if you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask. Yeah.